The first thing Maya Ellison saw on the night her life stopped belonging to ordinary people was a dead man's access badge swinging from her cousin's neck inside the back office of Pier 31. The badge was cracked at one corner and stamped with the photograph of a dock worker who had been buried 6 months earlier after a crane accident everyone at Port Elizabeth still discussed in low, careful voices. It hung against Marcus's wet hoodie, while a pistol rested on the desk between them. Maya's employee code glowed on the terminal beside a cargo release she had never approved, and the container yard beyond the window stretched under fog and floodlights like a steel city built for secrets. For one long breath, Maya did not move toward the weapon, the door, or her cousin, because 12 years in compliance had taught her that panic was exactly what guilty men needed honest women to perform. At 32, exhausted from a double shift and carrying more than 340 pounds on a body people loved to underestimate, Maya kept her shoulders square and her voice steady enough to make Marcus flinch. She worked routing compliance, not security, but compliance was where lies left fingerprints, and her father had raised her to understand that paperwork was never boring when powerful men were afraid of it. "Tell me you didn't use my code," she said, watching the terminal instead of his tears. Marcus swallowed, eyes sliding toward the screen where container HIMU 904771 showed a customs hold manually released under her name at 1:47 a.m., 7 minutes after she had been recorded at Gate C, inspecting a refrigerated truck with a broken seal. That timestamp mattered, because if the archive survived, it would prove she could not have been in 2 places at once. Marcus's shame arrived dressed as desperation, the same costume it had worn since childhood whenever debt, bad choices, or somebody else's money cornered him. He told her people knew Aunt Loretta's dialysis schedule, Dre's school, Maya's address, everything soft enough to press until he broke. They had promised one container release would clear what he owed, and his voice cracked when he said nobody was supposed to die. Maya looked at the dead man's badge, the pistol, and the terminal entry wearing her identity like stolen skin, then felt her father's old warning move through her. If a lie has your name on it, find a second copy before the liar finds you. Beneath the second desk drawer, taped where only she knew to reach, was the small grey backup drive holding her personal export scripts. For system logs corrupt supervisors always wanted deleted first. The office door opened without a knock, before her fingers could move. 3 Korean men entered in dark coats with rain beading on their shoulders, hands empty but bodies trained for immediate violence. And the 4th man who followed them seemed to make the cramped room rearrange itself around his authority. Kang Tae-oh was tall without needing to loom, early 40s, dressed in a black suit beneath a charcoal overcoat, with silver touching his temples and an old scar cleanly crossing the side of his jaw. His eyes took in the badge, the gun, the terminal, Marcus, and finally Maya, without slipping away after registering her size. He looked at her as if her anger, intelligence, body, fear and restraint were all different kinds of evidence. "Maya Ellison," he said, "your code released property from my protection." "Then your protection has a paperwork problem," Maya answered, and one of his men shifted forward before Tae-oh stopped him with 2 fingers. He introduced himself like a name could explain armed men in a port office, but Maya refused to shrink because a Korean Mafia Boss had stepped into the room with consequences in his coat. Tae-oh said the container carried machine parts and a ledger naming the person inside his organization who had been selling protected routes to his enemies. Someone had stolen the ledger, used Maya's code, and arranged for him to find her standing beside the evidence. "So I'm the convenient body," Maya said. Tae-oh's gaze stayed locked on her face. "You are the signature." She told him she had been at Gate C when the release happened, and the way Marcus flinched proved the truth had just become more dangerous than the lie. Headlights swept across the office window from the restricted lane below, too many vehicles moving without radio clearance, and Tae-oh's men reacted before anyone could speak. One killed the lights, another dragged Marcus away from the desk. Maya's first instinct was not to run, but to reach under the drawer, and tear the grey drive free. The first shot punched through the window before her fingers fully closed around it, exploding glass across the room and sending Marcus screaming toward the floor. Tae-oh crossed the office with terrifying speed, caught Maya by the back of her uniform vest, and pulled her behind a steel filing cabinet as bullets shredded the cheap wall where her head had been. She hit hard, pain flashing through her hip, but the drive stayed clenched in her fist, and Tae-oh saw exactly what she had chosen to save before herself. "Give it to me," he said, close enough that she could see rain still caught in his lashes. Maya held the drive against her palm and answered no, because the moment his war put her mother on the board, the evidence stopped belonging only to him. Another burst of gunfire tore through the office, and one of Tae-oh's men collapsed near the window, blood spreading across his white shirt. Tae-oh gave a command in Korean that sent another guard dragging the wounded man into cover instead of abandoning him, and Maya hated that she noticed the difference between cruelty and discipline. He pulled her toward the records hall, adjusting his grip at her elbow and belt when she stumbled, not treating her weight like surprise or burden, only like balance. Behind them, Marcus crawled toward the side exit, looked back once with a ruined face, and ran into the rain. Something in Maya's chest closed without a dramatic sound, because betrayal from family did not always explode. Sometimes it simply removed the last excuse you had been protecting. Tae-oh saw it happen, and did not waste time pretending comfort could fix it. "Now you understand why blood is the easiest place to hide a knife," he said, as bullets chewed through the door behind them. Maya turned on him even while moving. "Don't use my heartbreak like one of your mafia proverbs." For the first time, his control cracked at the edge, not into anger or amusement, but recognition. They reached the secured stairwell, where his keycard failed against a locked panel, and Maya shoved him aside, entered an override code from memory, and forced the system into emergency inspection mode. The lock clicked open, because paperwork, when understood properly, could become a weapon sharper than any gun in the room. They descended into the lower service level as alarms wailed above them, and rainwater ran down concrete steps in thin silver streams. Tae-oh took a phone call, listened for 4 seconds, and his mouth tightened. His driver was dead. His Westgate men were not answering, and when Maya asked if his own people had turned, he said only, "My own blood," with the terrible calm of a man who had trained himself not to pay grief in public. Maya thought of the stolen ledger, Marcus running, her code glowing on the terminal, and the wrong timestamp that somebody wanted buried beneath her corpse. "Then stop asking whether I'm your problem," she said, "and start asking why somebody wanted you to kill me before I could prove I wasn't." Tae-oh stepped closer in the red pulse of the emergency light, violence restrained in him by calculation rather than mercy. He asked if she could get the proof. Maya felt the drive digging into her palm and told him yes, but if the traitor knew the port system, the archive in operations was already being wiped. "Then you will take me there," he said. Maya looked past him toward the old tunnel access beneath the east loading lane, remembering the storm passage her father had shown her years ago, when he still walked the port like a man reading a second Bible, written in rust, concrete, and bad decisions. "No," she said. "I'll take you under it." Tae-oh stared at her for one measured second, and instead of arguing, he followed. The storm tunnel took them beneath the port through a black concrete throat, where rainwater moved around Maya's calves and forced Tae-oh to bow his head beneath pipes that had not been maintained since the city forgot which department owned them. His wounded man stayed behind with one loyal guard, leaving only Tae-oh and another soldier at Maya's back, which told her everything about how little he knew whom to trust. Halfway through the passage, her phone vibrated. The video showed Aunt Loretta in a clinic chair with a dialysis line taped to her arm, Marcus kneeling beside her with blood on his face, and an unseen man ordering Kang Tae-oh to bring the woman and the drive to Pier 14 before dawn. Maya watched until the screen went black because looking away would not make her mother safer. Tae-oh reached for the phone, but Maya pulled it back, already understanding that any rescue built only on his remaining men could become another handoff to the traitor. His phone rang next, and an older Korean voice came through on speaker in English, soft with poison. Tae-oh, your father died because he trusted outsiders. I see you inherited the family illness. Tae-oh's eyes went flat when he answered with one word, Uncle. Maya understood then that the betrayal was not a crack inside his empire. It was the foundation splitting open beneath him. The older man promised to let Loretta breathe long enough to regret raising a stubborn daughter. Maya did not know why those words unsettled her more than the gunfire above them. Men had called her strong before, usually when they needed her to carry what they did not want to carry themselves, or when they wanted permission to leave her unsupported, because she had proven too capable to be protected. Tae-oh did not say it like praise meant to flatter her into obedience. He said it like evidence had forced him to revise the category he had placed her in, and in the black tunnel beneath Port Elizabeth, with cold water pulling at her legs and her mother's life hanging from a phone video, that distinction was dangerous enough to make her crush the thought before it could become trust. They moved deeper through the storm passage with Tae-oh behind her and his remaining guard several steps back, the flashlight beam slicing across wet concrete, rusted pipes, and old city markings that had survived 3 renovations no one had properly documented. Maya counted distance by turns, drainage grates, and the vibration of trucks passing overhead, the way her father had taught her when she was still young enough to believe every lesson from him was only practical, not prophetic. The operations building sat beyond the next junction, but the water was rising faster than she liked, not flooding yet, just high enough to make every step heavier. Tae-oh noticed her favoring her left knee after the fall in the office and shortened his stride without announcing it, which irritated her almost as much as it helped, because silent consideration was harder to dismiss than performative concern. At the junction, Maya stopped with one hand against the wall because something in the air had changed. Beneath the stink of rainwater and harbor rot, there was a sharp chemical bite, oily and deliberate, the kind of smell that came from portable cutting fuel or cheap accelerant. Far ahead, a flashlight beam blinked once, then vanished. Whoever waited near the operations hatch had known they might come under the port, which meant Marcus had not been the only one who knew about the old storm route story. A memory surfaced with cruel timing. Marcus at her mother's kitchen table 2 months earlier, laughing while she fixed the sink, asking why she still kept those dusty port maps rolled behind the pantry door. She had thought he was making conversation. She had been tired enough, lonely enough, family soft enough to answer. "They know the tunnel," she whispered, and Tae-oh's face sharpened in the dim light, as if the words had shifted every angle around him. He asked how many entrances there were, and Maya told him 3 if someone had official maps, 4 if someone knew the old pump room. When he asked whether Marcus knew the pump room, bitterness filled her mouth before she could swallow it. Of course Marcus knew. Family always remembered the little doors you showed them when you still believed love could be trusted with architecture. Tae-oh gave his guard a low Korean order, then stepped closer and angled his body so the tunnel bend hid them both from the beam ahead. "Then we do not go forward," he said, and when Maya told him they could not go back either, his eyes moved toward a rusted maintenance ladder, half hidden behind hanging cables. The ladder led to a sealed inspection crawl space beneath the old customs annex, too narrow for armed men to move quickly and too dirty for anyone important to remember. Maya had used it once during a hurricane drill, when the main corridor flooded and supervisors argued instead of opening the bypass. She had been smaller then, but never small, and she remembered concrete scraping her shoulders, remembered one man joking that maybe they should grease the walls, remembered the quiet satisfaction of reaching the valve before any of them. Above that crawl space was the manual runoff diverter, a stubborn wheel that could send water roaring through the main tunnel ankle-deep in seconds and waist-deep soon after. "If we take that ladder," she said, "I can open the runoff gate behind us and slow them down without drowning anybody." Tae-oh looked at the ladder, then at her, not with doubt about her body, but with a tactical calculation of time, risk, and angles. That distinction mattered more than she wanted it to. "Can you climb?" he asked. Maya looked at his soaked overcoat expensive shoes, and bloodless composure, then answered that she could climb, and asked whether his suit could. His mouth tightened around the edge of something that might have become amusement in another life. "It has survived worse company," he said. The first shot cracked from ahead before she reached the ladder, and Tae-oh pushed her toward the wall while returning fire with controlled precision, each shot buying space rather than pretending to end the fight. Maya grabbed the bottom rung, pulled herself upward, and felt pain flare through her knee and shoulder as the crawl-space mouth caught her at the hips. For one ugly breath, old humiliation flashed hotter than fear. She heard every joke, every little insult dressed as concern, every man who had treated her body like a logistical problem before he treated her mind like a resource. Then Tae-oh braced one hand beneath her boot, steady rather than shoving, and said, "Use my shoulder." Pride was useless if it got her killed, so she exhaled, shifted her weight, and forced herself through while concrete tore her sleeve and scraped her arm. Behind her, Tae-oh climbed after her, with less grace than his reputation would have preferred, and his guard stayed below to hold the bend as Maya reached the diverter wheel by touch. She put both hands on it and wrenched until the old mechanism screamed open, sending runoff water thundering through the lower tunnel and turning the ambush below into curses, splashing, and broken line of sight. They crawled through the annex passage in darkness, thick enough to feel physical. Tae-oh's breathing remained controlled behind her, but she could hear the strain beneath it now, especially when his shoulder struck a pipe and he swallowed a sound that was not quite pain. Maya glanced back and saw blood darkening his shirt near his ribs, too steady to be only rainwater. He had been hit earlier and had not said a word, and the knowledge angered her before it softened anything, because men like him treated their bodies as property of the empire, useful until broken, and replaceable after that. "You're bleeding," she said, and when he answered that he was aware, she asked if he planned to mention it only after passing out. He told her he did not pass out, and she muttered that she did not drag handsome crime lords through municipal infrastructure for free. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the silence behind her changed texture as both of them recognized the line for what it was. Too dry to be comfort, too dangerous to be harmless. When Tae-oh finally spoke, his voice had dropped lower. In voice Baekho. Maya kept moving, grateful the dark hid her face, and told him his accounting department might be dead. "Then I will handle it personally," he answered. The crawl space ended at a warped panel that opened into the basement supply room of operations, and Maya pushed through first, landing hard on wet concrete with her knee screaming and her hands still steady. No guards waited inside, which made her more nervous rather than less. Upstairs, the building's old ventilation system hummed, and footsteps moved with purpose across tile. The archive terminal was on the second floor inside a glass-walled records room with badge access and a camera blind spot near the vending machines, a blind spot Maya knew because she had filed 3 reports about it and watched all 3 disappear into management silence. Tae-oh checked his weapon and asked how long she needed to copy the archive. 5 minutes if the server cooperates, she said. 10 if it hates me. When he asked what happened if the files had already been wiped, she told him her backup could prove tampering, but not enough to turn his captains. He absorbed that quickly, understanding that the original was the difference between his uncle looking suspicious and his uncle losing control. They went up the back stairwell slowly, because speed made noise, and because Tae-oh's wound had begun stealing more from him than he wanted her to see. Near the second-floor landing, voices came from the hall. One belonged to Ellis, a port security supervisor who had once written Maya up for tone after she caught him approving overweight trucks for cash. The other was young, Korean, nervous, speaking English poorly enough that Maya understood more from context than vocabulary. Delete gate feed, pull scanner logs, leave no duplicate. Her anger came cold this time, clean and useful. She touched Tae-oh's arm and pointed at the wall-mounted fire panel, mouthing one word, sprinklers. He nodded once. Maya pulled the panel, alarms screamed across the floor, and water, then don't fall. Tae-oh looked at her through the broken rain of sprinkler water and shattered glass, and the answer he did not give stayed between them, with more weight than any promise could have carried. He fired twice over the edge of the server rack, forcing the men in the hallway back, then shoved the second drive into the inner pocket of Maya's torn uniform vest with a precision that felt almost intimate because he did not ask whether she could carry the burden. He assumed she could. Maya tightened her fist around the white tiger ring, grabbed the rolling office chair beside the terminal, and kicked it hard across the wet floor toward the doorway. The chair spun into the hall just as another gunman fired at the movement, wasting 3 shots on plastic and chrome, and Tae-oh used those 3 shots to cross the gap, strike low, and pull the man inside by his collar before the others could adjust their aim. Maya did not watch the whole fight, because survival had no room for spectators. She crawled under the desk, yanked the emergency network cable from the wall, and used the exposed conduit to pull herself toward the rear service door, while Tae-oh handled violence with the ugly efficiency of a man who had stopped pretending his world could be clean. His guard shouted from the stairwell that more men were coming up. The outside packet had sent, but proof did not stop bullets in the next 30 seconds, and her mother did not have 30 minutes to wait for justice to gather itself politely. Maya reached the service door, swiped Ellis's badge from the lanyard she had torn off him earlier, and opened the back route to the employee elevator. Tae-oh appeared behind her with blood darkening one side of his shirt, breathing harder now despite the mask he kept trying to wear. "You need pressure on that wound," she said, stepping into the elevator, and when he answered that he needed Pier 14, Maya took the white scarf from her hair and pressed the folded fabric against his ribs before his pride could find another useless argument. The elevator doors slid shut on the sound of men pounding down the hallway, and Tae-oh's hand closed over hers to hold the pressure in place. For the length of the descent, neither of them looked away. His palm was warm, slick with rain and blood, his grip controlled but not distant, and Maya felt the awful pull of danger stripping every false kindness from the night, until only choices remained. He had chosen to arm her with authority instead of hiding her. She had chosen to keep him alive because his survival was tangled with her mother's, with the truth, and with something she refused to examine while men were still hunting them. They left operations through the loading dock and took a port utility truck Maya hot-wired with the spare key taped behind the sun visor, another lazy security habit she had complained about for years and now thanked God no one had fixed. Tae-oh sat in the passenger seat with his gun low and his eyes on every mirror, while Maya drove through service lanes she knew by pothole, chain-link blind spot, and broken drainage slope. Behind them, 2 black SUVs cut across the yard, their headlights bouncing over puddles as they gained ground. Maya did not try to outrun them on the open road. She swung the truck between stacked refrigerated containers, clipped the side mirror off against a steel corner, and took the maintenance lane toward the old weighbridge, where every heavy vehicle had to slow or risk cracking an axle. The first SUV followed too fast, hit the raised edge, and blew a tire hard enough to fishtail into a row of empty chassis. Tae-oh looked at her profile as the second SUV stayed behind them, smarter than the first, and gaining along the wider service lane. "You filed reports about that bridge too," he said, and Maya answered that she had filed 4, while nobody listened. He rolled down the window just enough to fire one measured shot into the pursuing vehicle's radiator when they turned past the fuel depot, and steam burst from the grille as the SUV slowed without fully stopping. Maya used the moment to pull behind a row of stacked pallets near Pier 14's access road, killed the headlights, and took the second drive from her vest. Her hands moved with the clean focus that had carried her through audits, grief, unpaid bills, and rooms where men mistook patience for fear. She sent the archive to the Baekho emergency distribution address Tae-oh dictated, but only after attaching the Gate C footage first, so every captain would know the woman wearing his ring was not a hostage repeating a script. The reply came from Captain Seo Min-jae in less than a minute, received, waiting for signal. Tae-oh read the message, then looked toward the pier where his uncle's men had arranged themselves beneath the cranes, with Loretta and Dre positioned beside a black SUV, under enough floodlight to make the threat visible from every angle. Min Jae's old guard, he said. If he moves too early, my uncle kills your mother. Maya placed Tae-oh's phone face down against the cracked dashboard, with the camera angled through the windshield toward the pier. The view was imperfect through rain and stacked pallets, but enough to catch a face, a voice, and a hand resting on an old woman's chair. Her father had once told her that people confessed differently when they believed only power was listening. She hoped he had been right. Tae-oh understood without asking, removed a spare magazine and pushed it into her hand. But Maya took the flare gun mounted behind the seat instead. I know what bullets do in other people's hands, she said. I know what signals do in mine. They walked onto Pier 14, with rain blowing sideways off the harbor and the first grey seam of morning opening behind the cranes. Tae-oh's uncle waited in a navy overcoat, silver-haired and patient, one hand resting on the back of Maya Ellison's folding chair, as if a woman attached to a dialysis port were furniture he had purchased. Dre knelt beside her with his hands bound. Marcus stood farther back with a split lip, and terror so complete it had made him obedient to everyone except his conscience. The uncle's gaze moved from Tae-oh's blood-stained shirt to Maya's torn uniform, and then to the tiger ring on her hand, and his mouth shaped a small, disgusted curve. You bring port help to a family matter, he said. Tae-oh's voice carried across the wet concrete without rising. You made it a family matter when you touched hers. The old man laughed softly and turned his eyes to Maya, trying to turn every dangerous current between her and Tae-oh into shame. He told her men like his nephew did not love, that they acquired, protected and punished, and that if Tae-oh kept her, it would only be because she had embarrassed his enemies tonight. Maya felt Tae-oh go still beside her, but she did not look at him. She had been talked down to by richer men than this one, smaller men than this one, men who thought her body made her desperate enough to accept any attention as rescue. She raised Tae-oh's phone just enough for the hidden camera to catch the old man's face. You used his mother's biometric to frame me, she said. You used Marcus because he was weak, my mother because she was sick, and a dead woman's name because you knew grief would make him angry before it made him suspicious. His hand tightened on Loretta's chair. And yet you came anyway. Maya held his gaze and told him she had brought copies, not loudly, not theatrically, but with enough certainty that several men behind him shifted before they could stop themselves. That was when Marcus moved, not bravely, not cleanly, and not enough to erase what he had done, but he moved. He slammed his shoulder into the guard holding Dre, sending both men stumbling into the SUV door. The guard's gun swung toward him. Maya fired the flare gun into the stack of wet rope and packing tarp beside the crane, not to burn the pier down but to flood the grey dawn with red emergency light. The flare hissed and screamed, reflecting off rain, glass and water, and Captain Seo Min-jae's vehicles rolled out from both ends of the pier while federal sirens rose beyond the access gate, close enough to make murder expensive and far enough away that everyone still had to choose. The uncle yanked Loretta's chair backward, dragging her toward the SUV, and Tae-oh moved with the speed of a man spending the last of his strength. He shot the tire first, then the guard's weapon hand, refusing the easier shot because Maya's mother was inches away. Maya ran too, her injured knee burning, her weight hitting the wet concrete hard with each step, and when another guard turned toward Tae-oh's exposed side, she drove the port truck's heavy emergency chock into the man's knee with both hands. He went down cursing. Tae-oh reached his uncle and put him against the SUV hood with one brutal strike, but when the old man fell, he pulled a small pistol from his sleeve and aimed not at Tae-oh, but at Maya. Marcus threw himself into the line badly, desperately, taking the shot across the shoulder instead of the chest, and Maya caught him as he fell, the impact nearly taking her down with him. Her cousin's blood soaked her sleeve, and his eyes were wide with pain and apology, but she did not give him forgiveness, because forgiveness was not something a man could steal at the end, after stealing everything else. She pressed her hand over the wound anyway. Family was not innocence. Sometimes it was only the place where mercy hurt the most. Across the rain-slick pier, Tae-oh had his gun at his uncle's head, and every Baekho man there seemed to understand the old law demanding blood for betrayal. Maya looked up from Marcus's wound and met Tae-oh's eyes through rain, sirens, floodlights, and everything they had carried through tunnels, servers, grief, and blood. She did not plead. She did not command. She only held his gaze